I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
Now, the presence of the drum major instinct is why so many people are joiners. You know, there are some people who just join everything. And it's really a quest for attention and recognition and importance. And they get names that give them that impression. So you get your groups, and they become the grand patron. And the little fellow who is henpecked at home needs a chance to be the most worthy of the most worthy of something. It is the drum major impulse and longing that runs the gamut of human life. And so we see it everywhere, this quest for recognition, and we join things, overjoin really, that we think that we will find that recognition in. The presence of this instinct explains why we are so often taken by advertisers. You know, those gentlemen of massive verbal persuasion. And they have a way of saying things to you that kind of gets you in the bind. In order to be a man of distinction, you must drink this whiskey. In order to make your neighbors envious, you must drive this type of car. In order to be lovely to love, you must wear this kind of lipstick or this kind of perfume. And you know, before you know it, you're just buying that stuff. That's the way the advertisers do it. I got a letter the other day, and it was a magazine coming out, and opened up. Dear Dr. King, as you know, you are on many mailing lists, and you are categorized as highly intelligent, progressive, a lover of the arts and the sciences, and I know you will want to read what I have to say. Of course I did. After you said all of that and explained me so exactly, of course I wanted to read it. But very seriously, it goes through life. The drum major instinct is real. And you know what else had happened or causes happen to happen? It often causes us to live above our means.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. I have a dream today.
Steady.
The game jam was really just came from this idea of like, we want a refresher. You know, we've been spending the last 8 years on Gears. Let's just take a week as a company and let's just take a breath and fire up some different thoughts. And so it was kind of interesting that it came out of that was, hey, there's a couple of things that are viable that maybe we want to talk about. And then the discussions around what happened at Game Jam is actually kind of what led to Fortnite. And Fortnite wasn't a direct result. It wasn't one of the games in the Game Jam, but that process was kind of the fuel that caused that to become created.
I think it was August of 2011. I was actually one of the first people to work with the very initial kernel of this team. It's a game that spawned directly from passion. This is just something that people wanted to build. We were just coming off of Gears, and we wanted to do something totally fresh with this one idea that we wanted to basically do like a building game. So we looked at a bunch of games for inspiration. We loved Terraria. We loved Minecraft. We thought these were really awesome games. We also had, interestingly enough, we had farming for a little while, where you would grow crops. We just thought let's do whatever. Let's see what feels right. I think a lot of other people have done versions of this, but like they've done just one aspect. Like they've done building really awesome, or they've done the shooting really awesome. But this is sort of the peanut butter and chocolate. And I think we're finally putting those two together to make the really awesome cup. I feel like this game is sort of in the zeitgeist. You know, other developers that we've shown this game to have come and said, you know, we were going to make that game, and then we heard you were doing it, so we stopped. Or like, I've had that game in my head for the last 10 years, and I couldn't convince, you know, our studio to build that game. I just think it was in the water. People
just wanted to show this a little bit.
People want to build blanket forts, and the floor is lava, and you are playing hide and seek, and you are just playing in sort of the landscape of your brain and just going nuts. When you're doing a game jam game, you just experiment. You go all out. Whatever works. So the game was super rough. It was done in UE3, and basically you used whatever assets you could get. So Fortnite originally was a lot.
I think it shows at least a little bit of just the general worldview of the people that created Fortnite. And how from there, whether, you know, consciously or unconsciously, their worldview forms the conclusions that they've reached and what we're now here to talk a little bit about. I did just see a question here real quick. And Jordan, this is not a dumb question. Do Africans outside the U.S. believe in the buying power myth and Black capitalism? Absolutely. This is a major problem. And in fact, there's even been some discussion, admittedly, we haven't gotten far enough, but there's been some discussion I've been having with with a brother that I know out of that Africana, that Cornell Africana James Turner circle, who does some publishing, and we were talking about doing a myth of African buying power, or something to that extent, like a part 2 or something that focused on some case studies throughout the continent. Obviously, we haven't gotten far enough because the reality is that they do. Now, the summary response that my oversimplification, and obviously there are differences, we're talking about an entire continent, but at the same time, my experiences, and I've been even on a couple platforms debating this or discussing this, is that whereas my argument is we need to assume political power to make these economic conversations moot, a lot of what comes out of the more prominent or popularly discussed, I know there's always a revolutionary undercurrent marginalized, is that unlike here, where Black America or African America or where Africans in America have sought to engage and bring in federal and then ultimately supra-federal, like United Nations support for our struggle here, a lot of what has been encouraged in the continent, because there's been an assumption that African people had assumed political power and that the problem was their corruption, that their focus has become private business as a solution. And within that has come, from my limited experience, this contradiction that their argument ends up becoming, well, if we develop a business and a business acumen, or develop upon our business acumen, we can overturn their corruption. And here we're saying the same thing to overturn, I guess, the corruption of both private and public. But in each case, I think we're missing the point that we need political power and not the development of business. So, but yes, the short answer is yes, they do. It is a global problem. It has just been targeted and developed specifically here in ways that I'm not familiar with outside of the United States. So, all right. So we saw a little bit of that. I did want to start with the drum major piece, because Dr. King obviously talks most directly about the power of advertising and manipulation. And it's something that he was thinking about more than I think I've realized or focused on in what would be considered my study of King. And when I went back to prepare for this morning, there was something that I had not ever, I don't ever remember this. If I ever knew it, I certainly didn't remember it. And, so it felt brand new, but, that Dr. King, immediately after the 1963 I Have a Dream speech, went and sought to copyright protect that speech from being resold without permission. So immediately he understood. Now I've understood from the different perspective. Like we all, like, he understood he was in front of the world, that there were cameras, there was a TV, there was a press, there was all of this happening. He was not naive in that respect, but I did not realize to what extent and to what level of detail this was being paid attention to. And the reason I bring it up now is because, as I titled this video, he had already lost the fight with Epic Games way before this year. MLK lost his fight after his radicalism was erased posthumously and with great effect. This is just the latest in a long line of egregious abuses. Even before his death, he was already suffering from this. He was already being falsely pitted against Malcolm X in the press. I've linked in the show notes to some work I've done on this, that in the process of which cites and references, I think, even more important and greater work on this particular subject. So I encourage people to follow up later on and get those details. But essentially, he was already being rebranded from, well, in one context, going from being touted as Man of the Year in 1965 to shortly before his assassination in 1968 being demonized in the popular press as an ignorant, naive fool, a buffoon, a clown, silly and foolishly running around after Stokely Carmichael and other Leninists, threatening national security, speaking on Vietnam and internationalism and anti-colonial movement. I mean, he was already being demonized. He had already been, before that, pitted against Malcolm X in the press as the one we want to, that we should want to support. He was used to make Malcolm look worse. And then when Malcolm was assassinated, he himself was made to look worse so that they could prop up more mainstream, commercial, centrist leadership. So I mentioned the other day that I had seen the Summer of Soul documentary. Who pops up in there? Of course, Jesse Jackson. 1969. He's now the putative, appointed, anointed leader. King has been assassinated. He did the whole wearing his blood thing. He did the whole let's take Dr. King's programs for direct action and redistribution and turn them into corporate grabs that he and Andy Young have popularly turned into a wave, a tsunami wave of anti-King analyses and interpretations, all draped in "we are the heirs of King," which is why, as I talked about for years, they were crying at the monument unveiling and all this other nonsense that King would have himself never supported. And that's why, of course, Andy Young pops up now, giving horrific JP Morgan Bank advice and money to Killer Mike in the Greenwood Bank Initiative. Remember, as we reported here, 40 of the $43 million that bank had raised had come from JP Morgan Chase through their connections, obviously, with Andy Young, maybe, so as part of this as well. So, but as I said, right after the 1963 speech in Washington, March on Washington, King moved immediately to protect his copyright and did win protection against the sale of the speech until 1994, when the evolved Dr. King family estate won an injunction against CBS. So in 1994, CBS was going to do a sort of 20th anniversary retrospect, or 30th anniversary retrospective, or whatever, or 30th anniversary retrospective, and wanted to use excerpts of the speech they had themselves documented in its original performance by Dr. King. And the family stepped in and said, no, you can't do that. I actually read some of the ruling, and it's based on a lot of very interesting case law. But essentially what they said was that initially King had a right against the resale of his speech, even though he had said it publicly, where some might have argued he lost the right to have it copyright protected. But when the family came back, and really it's not the families, we're going to talk a little bit about, the estate is more Dexter King than the rest of the family. But when the estate, and really it's not even him as much as it is, as we're also going to talk about IPM, or intellectual property management, which is none of them. But what they were saying is that no, even though he said it publicly, even though you were the original, even though you want to use your own original footage, CBS, his attempt to previously copyright, and now our estate attempt to protect the image that we have control over, you don't have the right to do that anymore. So I made a little note here that again, maybe Marshall McLuhan was right, that the medium is the message, because if you say it publicly in a crowd, you can retain control over it. No, you do not retain control over it. You only retain control over it when using the specific mass communicative technology of mass communicative technology. And once that, which allows for the consolidation of power and control, that's when you have control over it. So once it was deemed as a non-public statement, it did become the private property of the estate of Dr. King. By the way, I'll just remind, and it's in the show notes, the details of this are there in those links, but it's also after the 1963 speech that the state says very clearly Dr. King is a target. William C. Sullivan, running COINTELPRO for J. Edgar Hoover, said, "Oh, that's it. He's the most dangerous Negro in the threat of spreading communism, which may, as he connected it to, as we've talked about before, be connected. And the state needs to be worried about his affinity for Cuba and Castro." So, but ever since then, Dr. King has been struggling posthumously, even before his death, but certainly posthumously, against the public depiction of his ever increasing radicalism. So as I've said, in his life, as he got more radical, he was more demonized and marginalized and ultimately assassinated. In his death, he has been repackaged and rebranded and memorialized, certainly down the road in DC, as somebody who is unrecognizable to the man that actually lived in the last few years of his life. So all of his anti-colonial, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, his pro-Pan-African, his pro-internationalist, his pro-socialist, all of that rhetoric, all of that analysis, all of that anti-war, vigorous anti-war, connecting it to the struggle here of Black people, all of that is either fully diminished or either diminished or erased entirely. So MLK's immediate attempt to protect his image went for naught, given that once he was killed, he lost control over his political image. And I would argue, even though I wrote this, I would even add to my own writing that it even started before he was killed. But he had lost control over his political image and then his legal likeness, and by now has been totally divorced from himself, even by his own children. And that's one of the points I want to raise here, because in looking up because a lot of the questions online were how could a game get away with doing this? And where is the family's involvement in this? And are they, supportive of this? Well, Bernice King, as she says here, who heads the Martin Luther King Jr. Center, the King Center does not license Dr. King's intellectual property and therefore was not involved in any decisions concerning the endeavor with Time Inc. and PlayStation Fortnite. These licensing decisions are made by intellectual properties management. Okay. So how does that work? Well, who is that? Well, intellectual. So first it has to be understood that as she says here again, I just want to show one more from her Twitter feed. From her direct Twitter feed, that is. Decisions around licensing my father's intellectual property are outside my personal purview. And as she's retweeting here, that of the center itself. So how does that work? So there had been, and I had forgotten about some of this stuff. And first, well, we already went through that. I'll skip that. But if folks maybe remember, or if folks never knew, there has been a contentious beef of sorts from within the family. And some years ago, this is 2015, trial avoided. Dexter King dismisses King Estate's case against King Center. So you have the King Estate against the King Center. The King Estate is Dexter King. The King Center is Bernice, Martin Luther King III, etc. And what they were saying here is that the King Estate had voluntarily dismissed a lawsuit that they were for years holding up against the King Center, saying, look, the King Estate owns the copyright. The King Estate owns the license. And because of some personal beef, because of some arguments about where the money was going to go, who was going to get what part of the cut, Dexter started threatening and said, well, if I don't win, you all cannot have the name, and the King Center would be illegally then said to be using the King name and would have to give it up. So they ended that fight. So my point is that that Dexter evolved or took over the estate. The King Center was taken over by his siblings. They did reconcile in 2015 over the licensing of the name for the center, and they agreed to a more, I guess, agreeable cut of what was said to be around $30 million worth of King licensed or I think auctionable goods, and or there's a combination that comprised that number, but that money was what they were arguing about. And for instance, as it says here, just in terms of how this was working a little bit, even before now, it's the King Estate that had to approve, for instance, the 2018 Rams Super Bowl ad, in which it says in this article that they were paid $800,000 for the licensing of the monument. So the article is saying, I don't know how much Ram paid for the Super Bowl, but the monument paid $800,000 for the license of what is now the Dr. King Monument in DC, which, doesn't represent his politics. Some have said look more like the Chinese guy that made it than King. But regardless, it was $800,000 that was paid for that. All right, that's more about that. Okay, so this is who the King Center have controlling or running their licensing agreement, intellectual property management. At IPM, the principals of the business have over 80 years collective experience between them in the fields of image rights advisory, intellectual property, and wealth structuring. Our clients have access to at least one of our four principals, or I'm sorry, at least one of our principals. It is this director-led approach to relationships that we believe is key to providing clients with a highly personalized service in a cost-effective manner. For more information on the principles, please see below. So again, part of the reason why I'm arguing that King lost this battle with Epic a long time ago is because not only, I mean, we could even argue that not only did he see in his lifetime a movement he helped head in the direction that he was ultimately trying to get us to go in. This was the man that was talking about, redirecting rental payments to the refurbishing of those communities as opposed to the landlord. Permanent settlement encampments on the lawn in DC and in the White House or wherever until there was no war and justice was in other words, he was talking about direct action to confront and stop the normal flow of business. He was talking about redistribution. He was talking about ending war. He was talking about the Black struggle being connected to international anti-colonial struggles. He's then assassinated and turned into, on the one hand, a corporate shill for McDonald's and whomever. And as I'll get to as when we come back to Fortnite, it's logical that he would have ended up here, unfortunately, because he had been turned into whether selling, Ram, McDonald's, or worse, being used to sell a brand of politics that he himself in life organized against. That is some mainstream, support a Democrat, lesser of evils, give us some money, so we can claim to be doing the work of social justice, when in reality we want, just a handout and maybe a Black person on your board. Like that, he's already he suffered all of that already. He suffered going from man of the year in the popular press to being targeted, I would argue, for assassination by being called a threat to national security in the headlines of the Washington Post. 90 days or less than 90 days before he's killed. Like that's what he's suffered. So by the time we get to this, where his children, who, as others have pointed out, with I think to great effect, I mean, it wasn't just Dr. King that within that family didn't, and I don't want to get caught up in spreading misinformation, but correct me if I'm wrong. Look into for instance, the death of his parents, anyway, my point is that if you're his children raised in the aftermath of all of that, on some level the trauma is understandable if not excusable in terms of how the decisions they make. But then they get into this big beef over who's controlling the license, who's getting the control of the center. None of them, although there are differences, none of them are politically where their father was. But they get into this whole beef and argument. Dexter ends up working with the estate, the official entity in control of all of this, and then with IPM, which is this group here, who determine who gets to use King and for what purposes. And in this case, they get to determine that it is appropriate that Dr. King be associated with this game Fortnite. And again, Dr. King's daughter had no involvement with the Fortnite March Through Time event. But as it says here, we've seen these tweets. Let's see. The decision to use King's speech and footage came from Intellectual Properties Management, a for-profit corporation and, quote, exclusive licensor of the estate of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Bernice King states in the decisions, states that the decisions around licensing her father's intellectual property are outside her personal purview. However, the official PlayStation blog description mentions an interesting point. March Through Time would not have been possible without the contributions of American Family Insurance, the DuSable Museum of African American History, and the estate of Martin Luther King Jr., which, well, of course that would have to be the case. Okay, I don't know, but wait, the above wording doesn't direct. Okay, so this article I think is actually confused. Sorry, I was looking for this quote from the IPM people. The estate would be involved because that is Dexter King. Bernice King runs the King Center, and is so therefore there's no conflict here. But that's not the piece I was looking for. Apologies for that. Let me try this one here. Yeah, let's look at this one here because I did want to at least share from their perspective what their claims were, which I thought were pretty interesting. Time and Fortune have teamed up. The event is called March Through Time. Time Studios, by the way, Time, of course, who famously had, you know, Hitler and Mussolini as Men of the Year and stuff like that, right? And was like, you know, the Luce family, which are, you know, Henry Luce, right, was notoriously racist. So I mean, in many ways, this is perfect. But okay, here, this is what I think I was looking for. Time Studio mission is to embrace innovative new formats to tell the world's most impactful stories. We are thrilled to introduce our first ever gaming experience and expand our groundbreaking The March Project, which started as an immersive exhibit into the global educational event March Through Time in Fortnite Creative, said President of Time Studios, Ian Orifice. Wait a minute, is this The Onion? Is that really this? I'll just mess with you. I know it's not. I know. My bad, everybody. Forgive that. Epic Games and Fortnite community creators have been instrumental in bringing this powerful content to millions of players, and we are excited. Look, I know my last name is Ball. I can't be making fun of anybody, and I know that's not this. Anyway, I'm just saying. Anyway, we are excited to enable the next generation to explore Dr. King's historic impact. And while it's definitely new, most people are pretty sure this isn't the way King's words would have been immortalized. Imagine fighting for your own life and equality, getting assassinated, and then now your legacy will be a bunch of kids calling you that guy from Fortnite. That is messed up. Okay, so but their claim is that this is a new way to, in an immersive way, introduce people to Dr. King. But as I looked up and found interesting, and why I'm arguing that unfortunately it's logical that King end up here, is that Fortnite and Epic Games, but Fortnite in particular, have a long, apparently, history. I've never, you know, I had never, certainly never played, but I've only seen, anyway, I've only seen like one brief glimpse at it some years ago. But apparently they've also had appearances from Drake, Travis Scott, John Wick, Batman. They've been associated with, they've had World Cup tournaments. They've had Star Wars themes. So bringing Dr. King, who has been intentionally reduced in popular culture to a brand, bringing him to this is again perfectly logical. And again, why I'm arguing he had already lost this battle. And essentially that's it. I mean, it just stands perfectly to reason that he would end up here. And their claim, of course, would be that this is a new way to immerse people. But if you are First of all, hold on, Dawn. I almost missed this. That's right. Viva Panama. That's right. Let's go. Although on some level, and let me get now, on some level, I love Panama and Panamanians, but the political origins of it are really indicative of why Huey Newton was right about intercommunalism. There are no nationalisms or nations to which we can decolonize. All of these nations have imposed a reactionary intercommunalism, and we need a revolutionary intercommunalism that is in many ways boundary and borderless and certainly stateless. But Viva Panama, I appreciate you. I got the point. And I do remember that Boondocks episode, which I thought was one of the few Boondocks episodes that was as bad as it gets, and was another sign that the cartoon, the medium is the message, could never be the political animal that the original cartoon strip was. The televised cartoon, which I had a lot of fun watching, is funny. Season 3's opener about Obama is genius. But in many ways, the show was a radical departure away from the radicalism of the strip. And that episode in particular about Dr. King, I thought was a complete mess. And I had a short but pleasant, disagreeable discussion about that with the brilliant MC who does the theme song, my man Asheru, DC hip hop in the building. Shout out to him. Good brother, does good work. Was, I think, unfortunately biased given his relationship to the show, and incorrect on that issue. But they depicted Dr. King, I remember it vividly, in a number of incorrect ways, starting with remember Dr. King was confused as to what to do, and disparaging in his discussion of where the community was. And the living king was very clear, as we heard in the clip at the beginning of this segment. He was very clear about the impact of pop culture, mass communication, advertising, propaganda. He was clear about what was even happening to his own image and his relationship to his own movement at the end of his life. So I don't think he would have been confused as to what to do or as to what happened. And I don't think he would have been that disparaging of Black people and blaming them for the problems. When in his own lifetime, remember, he said, look, we don't condone crime, but he said the crimes that you point to that Black people commit are derivative of the broader crime of capitalism and the violence of economic and white supremacist injustice. So I didn't like that. And he did the pound cake. That's right. I didn't like any of that, the whole, and that's right. Asheru and Blue Black. Shout out to Blue Black as well. Really good brother. But yes, Asheru. I am the stone that the builder refused. He killed it on that joint. And then when he was performing live with the L's, in fact, I mixwhatilike.org. It's an audio, but they did a live, the L's, his band, his live performing band. They came into the studio, did a live on-air rendition of that track. That's, I think, better than what you get on the theme song, because it's more funky and in live. So go to our mixwhatilike.org and check that out. We disagreed on that one. We disagreed on it. Yeah. Judo flip, chop, chop, chop. And Oprah becomes president. Yeah, exactly. So now, speaking of which, it's important to note that moment that I was just describing took place at the mighty WPFW 89.3 FM in Washington, D.C., which is currently headed up by our dear sister Katia Stitt, who is the program director and is still in need of support for her medical bills and conditions and situation. And I am, hopeful that folks will follow what I've put in the chat and, share the link and encourage people to support her, because I couldn't have been there doing that show that night. And I don't even think she was program director that particular night yet, but her involvement with the station, her engagement and support of me and our whole hip hop block, which at the time was the only and the first block of hip hop on a national network, and certainly on Pacifica. But yeah, and you know, shout out to Mark Bolden, who was my colleague on that show, with DJ Two Tone Jones, and I don't know if he was there that night, Dr. Bolden. I don't know, but absolutely, this collabo he's describing here is easily a top 5, featuring Asheru, Raheem Devon, Talib Kweli, Raheem Devon, DC Zone. So anyway, you know, please support Katia. Please show her some love as one of the many people who work underground and beneath the surface, doing the kind of work that doesn't get credited, doesn't want the credit, doesn't know that I'm doing this, doesn't, you know, and is just a good person that needs our help. So, and yes, Aaron Magruder grew up in Columbia, Maryland, which is why I, you know, so much of that show resonates very clearly with me. He got a lot of the dynamics of growing up out here correct, and also showed that from anywhere, even these tree-lined streets, you can get some critical analysis and even some revolution. So shout out to Aaron Magruder for that, at least. Anyway, so anyway, that's it. I'll go through and see if I missed any questions or comments. I will wade into the chat here a little bit, but I just did want to respond a little bit to this Fortnite whatever joint. And oh no, I wouldn't have been. Oh, would he have been salivating over the McRib? Yeah, and he would have been noting that the cost of it is too high and represents capitalist exploitation of the workers, who he would probably be saying deserve full health care and at least $25 an hour minimum wage. So yeah, he'd have been eating that rib, but also talking about how those workers need to be better treated and how the food need to be a better quality. So absolutely. Nope, I didn't say I was lagging, and I don't know why I would have been lagging today. Oh no, anarchist liberal Dr. Ball can't understand Comrade Starlin. Now I'm an anarchist liberal. God damn. That's what I get for looking in the chat. This is more like it. Appreciate you. So I don't think it's bizarre that King's family would be careless, honestly. And I meant, you know, I don't mean to take it lightly. I think they grew up in an incredibly traumatic context. And their own father in his own life couldn't even protect his own actual position on things. So to expect that they would be raised in a condition and in position to advance where he was, given not only their father's assassination, but the devolution of that movement around him and around them, and the whole COINTELPRO strike that in the subsequent decades against more radical, I don't think that they could be expected to be, you know, I mean, look at the we've even talked about, you know, a couple, you know, Dr. Burroughs and I have talked about this a little, like look at the children of a lot of our icons. Unfortunately, it's hard to maintain, you know, what their parents were doing, because the context their parents were doing it in is different. So I try to give them a little bit of a benefit, at least in terms of trying to understand how they got where they got. And then we can just disagree with we could just disagree with some of their decisions. But Yeah, his kids were pretty young. His kids were pretty young. So anyway, good people, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it there. I appreciate you coming through. I definitely, please, do continue to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell and do all those things. I'll be back with our Mix What I Like on Friday. I think we're going to be on Wednesday morning with Mama Julia Wright to talk about Richard Wright, the UN, the new book, Mumia, and political prisoners, and the work she's doing around that. And maybe Dr. Johanna Fernandez will be joining us as well. And then we're going to have some other specials coming up to cover your Boom Bap breakfasts the rest of this week as we resituate ourselves. Now that we got back, as man, it took. So this is what I was going to say. Let me tell this little story real quick. So I dropped my oldest, at her high school where she hadn't actually gone yet. And as I watch her get out of the car, as she's walking into the school, this is deep now. This is deep. I said, man, I was like, and we had been listening to the radio. So as she's getting out of the car and starts walking to the school, work with me now. Picture yourselves, your own beautiful daughter, whoever you need in this image for yourself. Picture them walking into the school, towards the school. And as they get out of the car and start walking away, the song, The Temptations, I'm Losing You starts playing. And I know obviously the context is different, but I was like, damn, she's walking. And there's that line where Ruffin sings, something like, I'm giving another man has control over you. And I was like, oh, and she's walking past the principal going into the school. And then I see her go into the building as the hook, I'm Losing You, is playing. And you can see her walking in from outside. It's like a perfect movie set. From outside in to the school, and through the windows, you can see her going to her seat under the sign of the school name. So many contradictions. It was terrible. Now, before I lose another friend who wants to chastise me for our family's choices with where we send school, because I don't want to hear it. The question should be, what have we all contributed to this revolution to make this decision, this contradiction, a non-issue? Don't keep pointing to the individuals, just like I said about the king's children. Don't keep pointing to the individuals. Let's look at the context of our choices. Anyway, but it was a beautiful, that shot. I was like, if I was doing this as a movie, this would be a hot scene right here. Anyway, like Fred said, peace if you're willing to fight for it. If I didn't see it, we'll catch it later. Or if you sing this later after the live, definitely let us know what you think by
put it in the comments.
Click that like, that share, subscribe. Come on back this week. Check the other stuff. Sundays with the Ear Doctor last night was dope. A lot of great content on and coming. And with that, peace if you're willing to fight for it, like Fred Hampton used to say. And I'll catch you next time here at I Mix What I Like Live and Black Power Media. Peace, everybody. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. What I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.